Last week, we told you about the service Geofeedia, a surveillance tool used by law enforcement to target people based on their social media posts. Now, after the ACLU got involved, Twitter, Yahoo, YouTube, Facebook, and others cut off access to Geofeedia. Now it seems that Facebook was not only a source for Geofeedia, but also one of their clients. Joining us to talk about this is Russell Brandom from The Verge. Welcome, Russell.
Thank you for having me.
So according to your sources, Facebook used Geofeedia to catch someone who had broken into Mark Zuckerberg's office. Tell us how they did this.
Yeah, so they already had a contract with Geofeedia, and one of the things they were looking for was if there are any social media posts from specific areas, we want to know about it. And so the security team at Facebook, which is sort of tasked with watching out for these things, saw that there were photos being uploaded from Mark Zuckerberg's office, and they knew that he wasn't there. And so they said, it seems like that's something suspicious. And so they went in and they found that it was this person who wasn't authorized to be there. And it's sort of, it's unclear exactly who it was, but, obviously all these CEOs, have various sort of stalker figures and people like that. But so, yeah, the interesting thing about it is Facebook had been saying, okay, if we had known about this, then obviously we would have restricted access to our API. And so the fact that it was also, they were a customer as well as supplying the information suggests that, either the right hand really didn't know what the left hand was doing, or they're really only retracting it now because, it's out public and they in fact did already know. Now, and we don't know which one that is, but it suggests there's sort of more to the story than we really knew about.
So what you're saying is that this person was uploading the photos to his or her Facebook account, the person that was inside his office.
We don't know if it was Facebook. So again, Geofeedia, it could have been Twitter, it could have been Instagram, it could have been Vine or Periscope even. We don't, and so their goal, obviously all of these are public feeds in some ways, and so their goal was to kind of capture as many. It could even potentially have been Flickr as long as it was a public feed. So Geofeedia's goal was just to sort of give as complete a picture of social media as possible. And so, really, we know that it was some social media service, something public facing that Geofeedia had access to.
So what you're saying was when this story broke, Facebook was like, oh, I had no idea that people were using Geofeedia to, survey people to really and we had no idea. And in fact, they did. But you don't know if this was, Facebook's a huge company. It might have been that team might have been way separate from the people responding to this part of the story.
And I mean, I think one of the larger things is the question of who gets access to these APIs. I mean, I think as technology consumers, we're often rooting for more people to have access because a lot of times they build really cool tools that are very interesting. I mean, we've seen this a lot with Twitter where, there are these great features that Twitter itself doesn't develop, but people develop on top of it with the API. And so there's been a lot of encouragement for the API to be as open as possible and say, grant a lot of keys, grant a lot of access, and then if someone's doing something bad, catch them and revoke it kind of after the fact. And I think part of what we're seeing here is an example kind of the problem with doing that is that, in this case, it wasn't obviously a bad actor. And I think there's, to the extent that Facebook was looking for users of its API that were violating the terms of service or sort of doing something that would reflect badly on Twitter, or on Facebook, but Twitter as well. This wasn't an obvious choice. But then once you knew who their clients were, that there were a lot of law enforcement clients and that a lot of this data was potentially going to be used to throw people in jail, it sort of becomes a different thing.
So everything we're talking about are public posts, public Facebook posts, public Flickr feeds, Twitter, Instagram. So do we have more of an expectation of privacy than we really should? I mean, everything we're talking about is stuff that we're putting on the internet for anyone to see. So what's the complaint really here that a company is using all of this in aggregate?
Yeah, I mean, this is the tricky thing. I think it doesn't seem like any of this was illegal, right? I think a lot of times when there's a privacy concern, people say Fourth Amendment, this was an unreasonable search or, did they have probable cause or whatever? Whereas this, it really was public data. I think it's more of a problem for Facebook and Twitter and the various companies that are building these platforms, particularly with protests, right? So one of the things that came out in the initial ACLU report was that police were using this to look at a protest in Baltimore and then seeing if there was anyone. They used an existing facial recognition system that they had and ran it against these Instagram posts and said, is there anyone here that we have an outstanding warrant for that we can go arrest immediately, as a way to dampen down the protest? And I think, a lot of these services have presented themselves as sort of a positive force for social change in a lot of ways, where you can have a very effective protest and someone can be following it from home by just on Instagram or Twitter, right? And we see this, this has been hugely effective in a lot of police protests against police violence in the last few years. Well, if police are now using these tools like Geofeedia to actively clamp down on that with the service's permission and sort of active participation because of the API, then maybe people who are doing that are going to decide they don't want to use Instagram, they don't want to use Twitter, they don't want to use Facebook, they're going to use something else that doesn't do this. That's not a question of what's legal and what's illegal, but I think it's a question of how users are going to feel about sharing data to these platforms.
Yeah, and their understanding of the fact that sharing even little pieces of information in multiple places can create a bigger picture than they might not, it might seem totally innocuous in the beginning, but the bigger picture is much more, I don't know, bigger, I guess, for lack of a better word, but you know what I'm saying.
Or not smaller.
Yeah, or not smaller. Thank you. That's the better way to go. So Geofeedia also has been apparently marketed to public schools. What's going on there? I think the Daily Dot had this confirmation earlier.
Yeah, I think this is the thing. I mean, it's really tricky because a lot of people. And it's funny, before all of this came out, I had seen demos from them, and actually I felt a little silly as a journalist because it didn't strike me as a thing that was being used so heavily for essentially public safety. I mean, we have police and we have private security forces, and again, I don't think none of the people who are doing this, they're doing the job that they've been hired to do, but these are essentially. It's a tool that you could imagine being used for marketing. You could imagine it being used for some sort of, we've all seen a map of Instagram posts or tweets at some point. And in general, that's not an ominous or threatening thing. And that's essentially what they were doing. But then the question is, okay, that's the tool. What are you using it for, right? Mm-hmm. And so the idea of, okay, are we going to use this to stop kids from tweeting what they want to do what they want to tweet while they're in school? Is that something that Twitter wants to participate in? And again, what we've seen is that it's not, right? All of the services, as soon as this came out, lined up to say, we want no part of this. We're revoking our access. And again, in many cases, it was tricky to find the access, like exactly what was the API key that Geofeedia was using. The API system is not set up to keep track of things like this, just because we haven't really had stories like this in the past. The one thing was Data Miner was a Twitter tool that the Department of Homeland Security was using earlier this year that Twitter revoked their access after a story by the Wall Street Journal. But otherwise, we haven't really seen this being used as aggressively as we now know that it can be.
Well, what you're talking about really is chilling effects, right? If you talk about schools, like if we train students at a young age that it's totally normal to be watched like this, then they're going to feel like that it's okay. And when you're talking about people that might be put in a database purely because they tweeted about Black Lives Matter or something, like then, you might silence someone that might otherwise have something really important to say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and also just in a more material sense, I'm an avid Tumblr user, and some of the best content on Tumblr is being put on there by students in class. And so, and this is just fundamentally, your users are being punished for using your platform, right? That's what's happening. They didn't have to post on Instagram. They didn't have to tweet. No one has to put anything on there. And they did it. And because of this company, they had some negative consequences. And, you know, the API system wasn't tight enough at the time to prevent that. And so it took the ACLU to do that.
Well, Russell, thank you so much for covering this story. It's true, there's not much detail, but it is really poignant to say like that Facebook might have known all along what Geofeedia was doing, and thank you for pointing that out. So thanks for coming on. Russell Brandom is a reporter at The Verge and at Russell Brandom on Twitter.
Yeah, my pleasure. And also this scoop was also, I shared this with Colin Letcher, my colleague at The Verge, so I want to give him due credit because he did most of the legwork on this and was absolutely fantastic. So thank you for having me on. Was
he the one taking pictures in Mark Zuckerberg's office?
He wasn't.
Okay. Thanks, Russell.